Welcome back to Mr. D Does Games. It's been a couple of years, but I've had a lot of people asking for an upload, and I've decided I'm going to finally succumb. So I bring you today some chess. It's been blowing up in schools, blowing up in lots of places. People are keen to have a go at this quick game. So we have, what's it about? You've got two players, white versus black. You take the white pieces, your opponent takes the black pieces, or vice versa. And the idea is you want to try and mobilize your forces, your army, your troops, and take out the opponent's king. So the opponent's king is this black piece here, if you're white, and vice versa, your own king is down here. You can see it is asymmetrical in terms of the starting position, which is laid out at the moment. You have a whole row of pieces on your front row, which are your footmen, your soldiers. They're known as pawns. Then you have your bigger troops at the back. You've got your king, which is obviously the piece you are trying to protect. You have your queen, which is your most powerful piece. She can go a long way. Then you have your bishops either side, one on each colour. You have a white bishop and a black bishop. You have a pair of knights, and you have a pair of rooks. So there are 6 types of pieces. You have your king, your queen, your bishop, your knight, your rook, and your foot soldiers, or your pawns, as they are actually referred to. So this episode, I'm very going to quickly show you how the pieces move, the very basics. I'm not going to go into subtleties or details, but just a very quick idea as to how the pieces move, so that you get an idea of how to play your first game. In later episodes, we might see more interesting things like how to get people in checkmate. That's the ending position of the game. But for now, let's just find out what happens in terms of moving stuff. So basically, if you want to move something, you just need to start with your king. That king can move in any direction it likes into any of these surrounding squares. So it can move diagonally, it can move horizontally, vertically. As long as it only moves one space at a time, the king is permitted to move anywhere. There is an exception. Because the game is about trapping the king, if the opponent is attacking a square, say the opponent was attacking that square, you wouldn't be allowed to move into that square. So you can't move into a place where the opponent is attacking with your king. That would be known as a check. We'll come back to that in a moment. So the basic idea is your king can move one space, any direction. Let's move on to your most powerful piece, the queen. So this queen can move in any direction it likes, as far as it likes. So it can move in all of these different spots. Oh yeah, I can do your arrows as well, look. It shows you all the ways this queen can move, and it can go as far as it likes in any direction. So it's the same as the king. It can move horizontally, vertically, diagonally, and it can move as much as it likes. That's the exception to so the king can only move one space. The queen can go as far as it likes. It can't obviously travel through pieces. So if it meets a piece, it can't go through the piece. It can take the piece, and you take a piece by moving onto the square it's sitting on, so that would be the queen taking that pawn there. However, you can't go past, so I couldn't jump straight up and take the king like that. That's an illegal move. You could stop before you get there, but if you want to take a piece, you land on the square it's on. You can't go through the piece. So that's the queen, any direction, as far as you like, until you run it into somebody else's piece or your own piece. You can't go through pieces, as far as you like in any direction. So the next piece let's look at is going to be your bishop. So these, you have one on the white squares and you have one on the black squares. And these are like the queen in terms of diagonal movement. So you can move them as far as you like in any diagonal direction. Again, same stipulation, you can't go through a piece. You can only go up to your a blank space if you've got your own piece behind it, or you could take this pawn here if you wish to. You could move that up and take that pawn. Likewise, you go up here if you want to. Any direction, sorry, the diagonal directions only. It can't move horizontally or vertically, so it will always end up, if you look, however it moves, because it's going diagonally, it will only ever end up on the same colour square that it started on. Likewise for the white bishop, same rules, diagonal movement only, as far as you like until you hit something. Those are the bishops. I'm going to do the rooks next because the knights are slightly more complicated. So you will remember that the queen could move in any direction, and we saw the bishops moved diagonally. The rook has the alternate composition from the queen, so you've got horizontal and vertical movement in any direction as far as you like. So essentially the queen is like having a rook and a bishop together, combined. The rook can do the horizontal and the vertical movements, whereas the bishop can do the diagonals. Again, as far as you like in any direction, obviously needing to stop when you hit a piece, or take it, obviously. So that's the rook and the bishop covered. So we now have two pieces left. We have the knight. Now this is a prancing pony in some cases. It will jump around. So the movement of the knight is quite complicated in terms of it doesn't move just in a straight line. It moves in L shapes. So you move two squares in a direction, so it moves that direction, but it also moves an extra square to the side. So you could either move up one or down one from there. So actually the knight's movements form these two shapes. An L shape, it just moves two across and one up or down. Likewise, I could go two up and then one across, or two up and one across. So it actually works out L shapes all the way around, and it will be able to land in one of 8 different spaces. So it's always 2 spaces in one direction with 1 space in a 90-degree direction from that. So you form an L shape. Now it's worth noting with the other pieces, you can't jump over pieces in the way, whereas a knight can. If you had a pawn here, for example, you can jump over that and land here. It doesn't matter that there are pieces in the way. You can still jump over with a knight. So it goes 2 in one direction, followed by 1 to another with an L-shaped move. There are 8 different positions you can get to from any starting spot for a knight in the center of the board. We'll talk more about that at some other time. Obviously, if you are in a different position on the board, you may not have 8 spots available to you, but essentially the knight can move into 8 different positions. It can jump over pieces, and obviously it's attacking or can take any pieces in any of those spaces when it lands. So the final piece is the pawn. Now the pawn is very straightforward in terms of its basic movement. It can only move forward. It can go forward, but normally it can only move 1 space at a time. So a pawn, say it was here, could only move forward to there. That's it. A pawn here could only move forward to there. So they can only move forward 1 space at a time. However, if you have not yet moved that pawn, so say it's still in its starting position, you get a one-time opportunity to make it a speedy pawn. So it can move 2 squares off its starting position. So it's got a choice. It could go just the 1 space, but it can also go 2 spaces, but only on its first move. Not the first move of the entire game, just the first move for that pawn. So you could have 50 other moves having been played, but if you haven't yet moved this pawn here, you could move it, if you wish to, 2 squares in one go. From there on, it will only move 1 position at a time. So it would go 1, 1, 1, 1, until it reaches the end of the board. So what happens then? Well, if you get a pawn all the way from here, and say you're about to move it to the top and the end, you get to do a promotion. So a pawn, when it reaches the last rank, these lines, horizontal lines, are known as ranks. When you get to the final rank with a pawn, it gets a promotion. And then you can turn it into any piece you like other than another king. So if you want to, you could turn it into a bishop, a knight, a rook, or a queen. Now there are different situations when you might want to use one of those. Most people would tend to go for another queen because it's normally the most powerful piece. And yes, you are allowed 2 queens on the board as a result of having a pawn promotion. I know in most chess sets that it only comes with 1 white queen and 1 black queen, but you'll get over that. Quite a lot of people will turn a rook upside down, that kind of thing, or get another queen from another set if you need it. But you are allowed to have multiple queens. You could theoretically get a total of 9 queens if you manage to get every single pawn to the end and get them promoted to extra queens. You'd have your original starting queen plus 8 further queens. So obviously getting a pawn to the end of the board is brilliant news because you can actually then get an extra queen. Suddenly your measly little pawn turns into a really powerful piece and you can dominate your opponent. The final thing I need to tell you about pawns is how they attack. So I've mentioned previously that they can move forward 1 space. However, if there is a piece in front of them, they are blocked. They are not allowed to take by going straight forward. All the other pieces you take in the same direction, in the same way you move. Pawns are the exception. In order to take, you can only take diagonally. So actually, this pawn here is now blocked. We need a piece here to be able to take it. We're not allowed to move the pawn diagonally generally. It's only when there's a piece there and we can then take and carry on moving this pawn forward. So if there was a pawn here, we would be allowed to take that diagonally. But until there's something on that space, this pawn is now blocked. It can't do anything. If someone was to move their knight into there, Well, that's great news. Our pawn can then carry on forward, and then it would continue its motion forward unless it got blocked again. So for example, if there was a bishop there, the pawn could move forward, but it now cannot carry on moving. It has to wait until either the bishop moves out the way, at which point it can carry on its movement, or alternatively, it has to wait until a piece lands on one of these two squares so that it could then take that piece in one of those two directions. So they're the pieces. That's how they move. The idea is to try and trap the king. We'll talk more about that in another session. 6 pieces: king, queen, bishop, knight, rook, and pawn. And hopefully that's enough for the first episode. Enjoy your chess, and I'll see you in another episode.